Welcome everyone to session 4B, Satellite Data for Disasters. Here we have a wonderful panel of speakers, including HAQAST team members and our stakeholders. Without further ado, I'm going to pass along to Professor Daniel Tong from George Mason University. Daniel, you can start sharing screen.
All right. So my core project is working on extreme air quality events, including wildfires, dust storms, and other events. So today, because we only got 10 minutes, I'm going to cover one topic here, which is the 2020 Western wildfires, and especially focus on air quality management exceedances. So as you may remember, that was a very unusual year. And we had the entire United States, continental United States, was blanketed by these Western fires. And there was, if you look from the historic wind, okay, sorry, I'm going to start my video. Okay, so if you, from the historical view, this actually was also very unusual in two senses. One is very big. You can see that we have never seen such a big fire season in the 20 years, like, or satellite bodies and viewers start to monitor wildfires. And also it's unusual in that those fires occurred in this non-fire season. It's not traditional fire season, August to October. Somehow it's moving by itself. Okay, but anyway, the two questions we are trying to ask, one is, what is the air quality impact? Second is what is the exceedance that was contributed by the wildfires. So here, our methodology is very simple. We designed the two CMAQ simulations. One is with wildfires, another one without wildfires. We focus on the first gig fires period, which is August to October 2020. Use full chemistry, details, anthropogenic emissions, and all the other natural sources. For the wildfire emissions, we use a blended MODIS and VIOS fire detective product developed by Dr. Xiaoyang Zhang. On the left, that's a VIOS AOD for this one day, which is September 13, 2020. And the middle is the CMAQ simulation of AOD. It's not a perfect match, but you can see that the model was captured in the spatial pattern, also the long-range transport of the fire plume. But AOD is not smoke, what we are breathing. So we also compare that to the surface concentration, which is the EPA's air now. And on the right, and that's the air now concentration overlaid over the CMAQ simulation for the surface PM2.5 concentration. So how do we quantify the wildfire contribution to surface PM2.5? We use a very simple formula, which is the PM concentration with wildfire minus without wildfire, divided by the total concentration from the first run with wildfires. So if it's 0%, means wildfire contributes 0% to the surface air quality. If it's 100%, that means the all PM2.5 comes from wildfire emissions. So here we divide into four regions: the Pacific Coast, mountain area, Central US, and Eastern US. Over the Pacific region, you can see that the fire actually contributes up to 80% of total PM2.5 for the entire region. This is not just California, including Idaho, including Oregon. You can see the blue region here. Even in the mountain region, we are seeing that it's for several days actually come up to 70%. So that's really big. Even for the Eastern United States, you see that it's about 10% most of the time. So on average, for the entire population in the continental United States, we get 25% of the total PM2.5 from those wildfires. That was a huge. So, and we want to look at the impact on PM2.5 exceedances. Exceedances means when the daily concentration goes above 35 microgram per cubic meter. During these 3 months, we have 3,720 observed PM2.5 exceedances from the monitors. And on the day, which is September 15th, that's the peak day, we saw 273 exceedances as mostly contributed by the wildfires. So on the left is the difference between with and without fires. So we see the dots here is from the monitors. The dots only have two colors. One is green, which means it's normally it's non-violent day. If it's red, means there's an exceedance observed there. So when we saw the predicted difference between the two model runs is higher, we see predominantly where those exceedances are. On the right, you are seeing the contribution ratio. Pretty much in the Western United States was seeing up to more than 50% of the surface concentration that was came from the wildfire emissions. So this is showing the predominant impact of wildfire emissions on those exceedances. So as a model, all the models have their uncertainties. So we are also looking at the potential uncertainties. So we're looking at the emission sources, the plume rights schemes we're using. So we use the satellite observation of aerosol height from the miser sensor and compare that to two plumes. One is northerly plume, another one is southerly plume from the California complex fire, the August complex fire. And we use three plume rise schemes. One is the bricks, which is a default in the CMAQ model. We also developed we added the FRITAS scheme, which is commonly used in another model, Wolfcam. And I also developed a new scheme called SOPHIA-F. And we put all those three into the CMAQ. And then now we're trying to rerun the model and see if you use a different plume rise scheme, how much it's going to impact your plume transport, which is a big deal because the injection height is also very critical for how far the plumes can be transported. And earlier today, I heard Sarah from Idaho was asking for the question, how do we quantify the transport plume to her state? And this is one of the methods we can use to do that. And we found that if you compare this model predicted plume height to the miser observation, so there are three model runs which in different colors. The dots are the miser observation because the miser has a much finer resolution than the model runs. The model is 12 by 12 kilometer resolution. The miser is much finer. So you will see multiple dots. But in general, we found that simulated plume heights are comparable to what a measured. And also there's a difference if you use a different plume heights. The bricks generate higher plumes and next by SOPHIA-F and then FRITAS. But FRITAS itself also has a lot of uncertainty in the parameterization. So we are further tuning that. But anyway, the message we have here is, if you use different plume rise scheme, you're going to get different results. But how much of the result it is and what's the impact on exceedance? I believe this is also a very important policy question because we are using those models as one of the most sophisticated models to study the impact, air quality impact and health impact. So on the left, lower left, the figure showing the difference in PM 2.5 concentration. So if you use bricks or use FRITAS, you can see the difference. The difference is up to 30% of the total concentration. So that's huge. Okay. On the right, we are showing the impact of using this different scheme on predicting exceedances. So there are different colors. It's very confusing. Let me try to explain it to you. And if it's all, if the exceedance is predicted by all, then you're seeing the brown color. Okay, in here, the good news is pretty much you see the brown color dominates that. But if you use different schemes, you're going to have different results. But the good news is that we still have a certain range of confidence in the result because it doesn't matter which scheme you use, you are going to capture most of the exceedances. So one of our stakeholders is WMO and the World Meteorological Organization. They are very interested in the work HAQAST is doing on the wildfires. So they use our core project as one of the backbone projects to develop a new initiative over North America It's called a vegetation fire smoke pollution warning advisory and assessment systems, VFSP WAS. The idea of that is they're going to put all the observations, the predictions together and come up with the partner institutes with services, the products and the services. And right now we are establishing a North America Center, which have 3 regional nodes in Canada, US, and Mexico. And so that's one slide disappeared. I probably using an earlier version of my talk. But anyway, so I'm one of the co-chairs for the new center, and we are establishing 7 working groups, and we hope hopefully we're going to launch this new center next month-ish. Okay, to wrap up, we show the impact of the 2020 wildfires on air quality and the impact of permanent schemes on those exceedances. And that's a new initiative of the WMO Wildfire Center. So next, we are going to assess the health impact to how many people actually are impacted by those exposures from wildfires. And also we're going to develop this North America ensemble wildfire forecast that's used that as a part of the WMO official product. And we're going to prepare to release the data and the code with NASA Goddard and NYU and also EPA. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Daniel. For the participants and panelists in this session, please feel free to type up your questions during the session, in the chat box or in the Q&A, and I'm gonna, gather them and run them through after all the presentations during the Q&A session. Thank you. Our next speaker is Chris Uejio. Chris, are you sharing screen?
I'm trying to, sorry. Can you folks see that? I'm going to take that as a no.
I saw it for a second and then it disappeared.
Okay, let's try again.
Okay, looks good.
Apologies. Okay, you folks can see that?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, folks. My name is Chris Uejio, Florida State University. We're one of a handful of the NASA HAQAST teams that are working on extreme heat. So due to that, I decided to do just a little bit of an intro. Apologies for those of you who are quite familiar with this area. So extreme heat is one of the most important weather-related causes of death and preventable death and illness in the United States and globally. There's some key risk groups that we're interested in. I won't go belabor these too much, but older adults who also are more likely to have pre-existing conditions, infants, children, and people who are pregnant, people who are of low income or unhoused, athletes and outdoor workers. And one perhaps sort of shorthand way to think about this is it's not that different than the populations of concern for COVID. So these are many of the same groups, perhaps aside from children that we are concerned about, or we are also concerned about for extreme heat. So there's a wide literature on what is related to extreme heat, which I won't go into too much detail, but I'm essentially just going to present some of our very, 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 very preliminary findings from one of our Tiger team efforts to look at environmental justice. So in which case we're supporting Miami-Dade's, who has one of the world's first chief heat resilience officers. So there are a few more in the world. There's South Africa, Greece, and a couple other places. And in the United States, more locally, Maricopa County and Los Angeles County have just started theirs. And they've asked us to just provide them some support. And this has turned out to be a really nice synergy. So perhaps one of the, as I was hinting at in the previous slide, one of the things that I think is important to put out there is it's not just the urban heat island, the structure of outdoor temperatures that's important in terms of describing or characterizing the places and periods of time where people suffer the greatest heat risks. And that makes a lot of sense to the public health folks, right? Like, obviously it makes sense if you have air conditioning, access to air conditioning, you have health insurance, the list goes on. So some of these are listed here in sort of an old school vulnerability framework of exposure and sensitivity and adaptive capacity, which I won't run through, but we came up with a list of things that have been in the literature and would likely be related to heat-related illness in the study area. So thanks to this NASA HAQAST project, we were able to, my collaborator, like Dr. Uejio, was able to create a relatively, I don't know, quick and dirty is the wrong word, but it's something, essentially a relatively quick urban heat island map covering 20 years just from MODIS of all the days which have 50% or less cloud cover of land surface temperature, right? So to be clear, land surface temperature is different than air temperature, which is most important for human health. And this is outdoor air temperature, outdoor land surface temperature, that we're not even talking about indoor temperature where most people spend most of their time. Anyway, compared to baseline activities, Miami-Dade did not have a good map. They had one Landsat image, which they weren't using. So notable improvement, in my opinion, and thanks to Dr. Who. So just jumping into some of our results, I haven't actually showed you even what some of these look like, but we have classified extreme heat emergency department visits and hospitalization rates. We've chosen to separate those out. Sometimes they're lumped together for reasons I'll go into in a bit. This data set isn't particularly detailed, right? This is sort of, again, it's sort of like a rapid response to Miami-Dade's request. So we don't have individual level information to look at disparities or some of the really interesting things that are going on there. We just have zip code level, right? Really broad level rates over a 5-year period. And then we're essentially then the zip code level demographic or other heat related exposures that result in higher risks. Some of this plays out as you'd expect. We see higher daytime surface temperatures has a positive relationship to increases your ED rates. Some of these for perhaps older adults, somewhat maybe somewhat counterintuitive, but based on other sort of ecologic or neighborhood level studies is not necessarily counterintuitive. You think of who retires in Florida, it's usually people who are richer, not necessarily people who are living alone and socially isolated. So the proportion of outdoor workers, proportion of Black, non-Latino residents, and proportion of Indigenous also important. So on the left are just, sorry, well, okay, in the ketchup and mustard colors are essentially going to be the ED rates, just trying to show you this correspondence, since seeing is believing a little bit more with outdoor workers. You can see both in the bottom portions, for those of you who aren't as familiar with the area, is essentially a lot of outdoor workers. That's the agricultural growing region, one of the agricultural growing regions. There's, and then in sort of the top right of the Miami-Dade region is more the downtown district, where you can have neighborhoods that are really poor right next to really rich neighborhoods. It's a little bit different than some places in the US. Black, you can see portions there, also in that downtown area, but also in some of the agricultural areas and the urban heat island effect. So moving on to hospitalizations, that just being a more severe indicator of heat-related illness. Again, this is a bit of an, this is classified heat-related illness, so it's an undercount. And we see things that we would expect. So stated one way, we don't see the urban heat island here, right? So conditional on there being hot, sufficiently hot across the study area, there is the relative difference living in the urban versus the rural area is not important for hospitalization, so it was for emergency department visits. So really the most important things here are just socioeconomic position factors, living in poverty, and if you're in a mobile home. So these are modifiable, meaning that we can do something about them, right? Which is nice. Just to map those out, again, the red is hospitalizations. If you had to squint at them, you'd probably say that look kind of pretty much the same as the ER map, but they're slightly different enough to pick up these subtle differences. Again, both of those two core areas being relatively impoverished and having higher portion of mobile homes. Just with the balance of my time, I just wanted to take a nod to a couple other studies, just because it's a bit of a survey. Disasters is such a big subheading. Our core project is actually looking at cooling infrastructure, and I define that as sort of like green infrastructure, but also cool roofs, cool pavement, bioswales, et cetera. In New York City, if we're able to essentially, by blending ground-based observations from eco-stress, ground-based observations from private weather networks, and other sources of information, can we detect to what extent are those lowering the outdoor air temperatures for heat risks? So that's who we're working with New York City on that project. There's just some preliminary results there. As you would expect, things are a little bit more complicated. I won't go into this too much detail, but trees, which I think is very in vogue with urban planners right now. They like to, maybe not even urban planners, but the general public, they like to plant trees when they think of the urban heat island. The effect isn't just a net cooling. There is a net cooling effect, but there's some nuance there, whether it cools more during the day versus the evening, and there's an increase in humidity as well. So pretty intuitive to the Earth Ocean Atmospheric Science community, but not always intuitive to public planners. Just switching gears completely, just to throw that out here, because this is a disaster session. This is a completely different project. We looked at Hurricane Michael, which hit the Panhandle area of Florida. And we just came up with a way to classify blue tarps. And these aren't even satellite observations. These are just aerial photos at a 1 square foot resolution. So really, really fine resolution. So about 8 terabytes of that. My poor graduate student who was working on it, Elena, classified them with relatively high accuracy, but essentially just to sort of show the range of sort of disaster stuff that we're working on. More importantly for our team, we were able to link that to decreased access to prenatal care, but not actually as many negative health outcomes as just looking at the FEMA categories. So for context, there's other ways to look at exposures besides if you live in a household with a damaged roof, or you have significant infrastructure damage. You just say, do you live in a county, literally a county that has significant damage? And that actually showed stronger relationships for some of the health outcomes. So I'm going to leave that there. Thanks all my collaborators. Thank you for participating. We really appreciate the stakeholders and your time, particularly staying on now, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Our next speaker is Natalie from Pima County, Arizona.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Sorry. I'm getting my Zoom is covering up my buttons there. There we go. Okay. So my name is Natalie Shepp, and I work for the Pima County Department of Environmental Quality. And I was asked to provide kind of local stakeholder perspective on this topic. And so I'm just going to kind of review what our department does and potentially provide some insight into how all the good work that you all are doing can be applied at a local level. So Pima County, Arizona is a very large county. It's the size and actually just about the same shape as Vermont here. We have a very unique environment. If you think about kind of your quintessential desert environment, you can see this picture here with our saguaros. That is what we are. We are in a valley with some beautiful mountains surrounding us. Most of the air pollution issues that we have are in the Tucson region on the eastern portion of the county. The central portion of the county, a large chunk of the county is the Tohono O'odham Indian Reservation. And then we have some rural areas along the western portion of the county. And you can see here that we are also have a large section of border with Mexico. So I am the manager for the PDEQ Clean Air Program, and we work to educate and encourage Pima County residents to drive less by using alternate modes of travel. And we do that through a variety of means, community events, youth and school programs. We have a wide variety of community partnerships, including strong partnerships with the University of Arizona, which is located in Tucson. And we administer the Pima County Travel Reduction Program. We also issue air quality advisories as needed, and those are typically ozone advisories that we have to issue in the summer. We are in attainment for ozone, but we are on the cusp of being in non-attainment since the new standards were released, but we have just skipped by every summer by the skin of our teeth. And so we are still in attainment, but we do have to issue quite a few advisories every summer. And PM10 is also an issue that we have to issue advisories on periodically. We do environmental justice analyses and outreach for air quality permits that we issue. In fact, we're doing a very contentious environmental justice review right now for a permit for ethylene oxide. And we do outreach through social media, presentations to community groups, of course, news and media interviews, news releases, and then we administer a program that is a voucher program to try to encourage people to turn in their gas-powered lawn and garden equipment in exchange for electric equipment. The Clean Air Program has two funding sources. One is, they're both from the state, the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, for the Clean Air Program. We've had that for approximately 30 years. When we used to have a carbon monoxide problem, that's when our program began. And then we get a separate grant from the state for the lawn and garden voucher program. So collectively, some of the challenges that we deal with, the big one is wildfires. In June of 2020, we had a significant wildfire in our mountains that lasted for approximately a month. I was not in this position at the time, so unfortunately I don't have the experience to really talk about that, but hopefully I can answer your questions if they come up. But we do, this is something that we will continue to have to deal with for years to come, wildfires locally in our area, as well as smoke that comes from wildfires throughout the state and other parts of the Western United States. The other issue that we do have, and we did have this just a couple of months ago, are very large dust storms. We have a very active summer monsoon season, which gives us violent wind and rain. And just to the north of Pima County is Pinal County, and to the north of that is Maricopa County. And in Pinal County, the county in between Phoenix and Tucson, is made up of a lot of agricultural lands. And so oftentimes the wind is coming from the north to south, it picks up a huge amount of dust, and then we get just completely inundated with dust, and we call those haboobs, if you haven't heard that term. Like I said previously, we're very close to violating the 8-hour ozone standard. Other challenges include a lack of sufficient infrastructure to really effectively promote alternate mode usage, worsening extreme heat. And so I've been learning a lot just today on that topic, and that is something that we will be addressing in the years to come. And our health department recently did receive a BRACE grant from the CDC to address that issue. We have kind of an inability to address very long-standing environmental injustices. I often say that I think Tucson is kind of a poster child for environmental injustices. And so that's something that is a high priority for us, and something that we're going to be working a lot more on in the future. We are in attainment. We have a small PM10 non-attainment area within Pima County in the Uejio area, but we don't have, we have pretty limited funding. And so a lot of times we have things that we'd like to do, but we don't have the resources to be able to do it. And then of course, the political climate creates issues that kind of limit our partnership opportunities with other local agencies, and even the state agency can sometimes be problematic. So as far as how we could most effectively use satellite data for disasters, the biggest issue, after speaking to my colleagues in my office, these are the issues that came up: forecasting wildfire smoke to issue advisories further in advance. We do have forecasting that's conducted by the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality that is for Tucson and the Uejio non-attainment area, which are really helpful, but oftentimes those are not so accurate. And internally, we do issue kind of our own assessments, our own forecasting before we issue advisories. And it would be helpful if we could collect data that would help us do that further in advance, and also provide us with data on wildfires that are outside of our region that we can then notify the public to let them know about what they should and shouldn't do throughout the day, depending on that. So that would be something that would be really helpful. Explaining that our dust sources, when we do have those high wind events, being able to explain whether they're coming from local sources, nationally or internationally. We have had dust come in all the way from China that's reached our county. And so getting information about where that dust is coming from would be helpful to us. Determining how wildfire smoke affects our ozone levels. We did notice during our fire in 2020 that our ozone levels were more elevated, and when the smoke came into our valley, it did often affect our ozone. So kind of trying to make that connection between wildfire and ozone is something that we're in need of. We, like I said, have heat issues, and those issues are getting worse with each passing year. And so really being able to determine those localized heat extremes and being able to target communities that are going to be more effective is going to be something that we'll need to do more of in the future. Of course, the natural event determinations, and I think that's something that is pretty common for Western states, as we've heard today. And then determining ozone transport contributions. We are approximately 100 miles away from Maricopa County, and the Phoenix area does have pretty significant ozone issues and is in the non-attainment for ozone. And then depending on the way the wind blows, California contributions or other locations, it would be helpful to determine how much that's contributing to our ozone issues. So that is about it. That's all I have for you today.
Thanks a lot, Natalie. Next, we have Mariel from Westar. Alex, can you bring up Mary's slides?
Hi, everyone. I guess I'm batting cleanup here. I'm going to talk about a Western air quality perspective on satellite data for disasters. So I'm the executive director of Westar. Westar encompasses not only the Western States Air Resources Council, but also the Western Regional Air Partnership. Next slide. So just a quick overview of Westar and RAP, because I know, I think we confuse a lot of people with who we are and what we do. We are a service organization to our membership, which is the 15 Western states, local air agencies, tribal air agencies within those 15 Western states. We also, within the RAP, we incorporate federal land managers and EPA into our membership as well. Westar, some of the things we do, we provide training to all of our members. That's EPA training to help them either train up new employees on how to do the jobs within an air regulatory agency, or seasoned employees with more advanced training. We provide a forum for discussion of all Western air quality issues, and we inform policy-related discussions. The Western Regional Air Partnership is a virtual organization that exists within Westar, and the RAP is really sort of the technical arm, providing regional technical support for more than 70 member agencies. That RAP has a board and committees studying things like fire and smoke, oil and gas emissions, but regional haze planning, as well as the gathering of tribal emissions inventory data. We have a lot of good technical work that goes on within the RAP that benefits all of the West. So next slide. So how, I guess the next question would be, how does Westar and RAP, how do we work with EPA? And the states fund Westar and RAP by setting aside part of their EPA grant funding. They've been doing that since the early 1980s. And those funds come to Westar and RAP through an EPA grant. We do receive some funding directly from the states for specific projects. And sometimes we get funding from other federal agencies like the Department of Interior, the National Park Service, the Forest Service, the BLM. As far as communications, EPA communicates with states throughout the country through the multi-jurisdictional organizations like Westar RAP. And Westar RAP communicates back to EPA through letters that we write and also at 2 large meetings that we host in the fall and the spring. We coordinate with EPA through what's called the Federal State Technical Work Collaboration Group. That's kind of a mouthful, but that is a group that started about 6 years ago because of sort of the vacuum of information between what EPA might be doing on the technical side, on the modeling side, on the emissions inventory side, and communicating that out to the states. The MJOs are sort of the middlemen in that communication piece. And then, of course, as I said, we provide training courses to the states. EPA distributes funding to us to do that. Next slide. So here's a map of the multi-jurisdictional organizations. Westar RAP is, of course, the largest geographically. There's also the central states, sort of analog to Westar RAP, and then the LADCO, which is the Great Lakes area states. Metro 4 SESARM is the local and southeastern states. The mid-Atlantic states have their organization, and then the northeastern states have their organization. All of our multi-jurisdictional organizations operate in slightly different ways. Some are more technically focused, some lean more towards policy. There's also an Ozone Transport Commission region that was established to do work on ozone transport in the eastern US. And there's some overlapping membership between within the Ozone Transport Commission. So next slide, I guess. So what the MJOs do, we talk a lot together about how to coordinate training, how to make training available throughout the US, making sure that if, say, Westar is offering a training that that might be of interest to southeastern states, that we kind of facilitate that kind of cross-pollination between the states. We also work together with EPA to improve the technical work that EPA does, to communicate that out to the states and between the EPA regional offices. And then we collaborate a lot together, sharing our knowledge, our leadership efforts, and our initiatives. And we often host joint workshops. A good example of that is we've hosted between the MJOs several workshops for the states and EPA on regional haze. So next slide. Western air quality. Gosh, there are so many things to talk about. As you can see, I just pulled some of the headlines, recent headlines. Health risks of smoke and ozone rising in the West. Wildfires increasingly an urban issue in the West. We saw that with the Marshall Fire recently. America's skies getting clearer, millions still breathing unhealthy air. I think that the general trend in the US is towards better air quality. In the West, we're seeing worse air quality. If you don't take out the exceptional events, in the West, we are definitely trending in many monitoring locations towards worse air quality. People are not breathing better air quality in the West. And then, the Dust Bowl effects, I think Natalie just talked about the dust storms and air quality really, at times in the West, we see the world's worst pollution because of mostly impacts from wildfires in the West. And we've been talking a lot about this at Westar, the ongoing aridification of the West, what that means. Our last meeting, we were talking about the aridification of the Great Salt Lake and what that means as far as less precipitation for the Wasatch Front area, as well as the issues with dust on snow that can cause the snow to melt at a higher rate, a quicker rate than previously before. So next slide. So as far as satellite data, I was trying to I was thinking there really is, in terms of events in the West that are causing great impacts to air quality and public health. There's the short-term response, and state agencies have been working on this, I would say, for the past 2 decades. State agencies have gotten very sophisticated. For instance, many states have now smoke blogs, and I think if you saw this morning's presentation by Sarah Strand from Idaho, you saw her mention these smoke blogs too. States are communicating with the public about smoke impacts in immensely creative ways and in very real-time ways. The public, when there are wildfire smoke impacts, they have many questions for state agencies. Is it safe for my child to go to school? Is it, from a school, is it safe for us to send children out at recess? What about sports practices? What about walking my dog? What about going for a hike this weekend? Is it going to be okay? So anyway, there's that short-term state agency response, and many of the states are using satellite data to communicate that, those impacts, looking at forecasting, how long will the smoke last, those kinds of things. And then next slide. There's also the long-term response that state agencies have. If an event, a wildfire smoke event or a dust storm is determined to be regulatory significant, and that can happen and frequently does happen years after the event, because many of our national ambient air quality standards have long-term or 3-year averaging periods. So sometimes states don't know until they get to the end of a 3-year average that they have events that are regulatorily significant. In other words, an event that would make the difference between an area being bumped up for within a non-attainment classification and or causing a non-attainment classification. So the states have a lot of responsibilities after they're done with the short-term public health response to wildfire or dust storm, and many of the states are using satellite data. It's very helpful to them in the development and submittal of those exceptional events demonstrations. Many of those demonstrations are hundreds of pages long. We just saw the first, I believe, Ninth Circuit Court decision earlier in about 6 months ago, where the state upheld the state of Arizona's exceptional events demonstration. That was sort of record breaking in some precedent setting, I should say, in some ways, because there is these exceptional events demonstrations do require a lot of technical data. So and so again, the state agency response long-term, the defense of the submittal, that could also involve satellite data as well. Next slide. So as I think I just went over this, what are some of the ways that satellite data can help? It's really important for state, local governments to have access to that data for years, because sometimes states are doing these things, several years down the line. Some of the other weight of evidence that might be helpful for states in exceptional events demonstrations: drought, water vapor loops, smoke plumes, and other utility too, that may assist state and local air regulatory agencies. Changes to burn scars over time, areas of blowdown of trees, and then something we're just starting to talk about in the West is that urban suburban area air toxics and tracking that plume at great frequency. because of the air toxics that may be within that plume, particularly when we have these urban interface fires, such as the Marshall Fire. Next slide. I think.
We could wrap up. We're getting pretty close to time.
Okay, I think I'm about done. As I said, we've got committees and work groups. We emphasize sharing of data, sharing of analysis between the states. Next slide. And I think that's it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for that sharing of your experience with satellite data. I mean, I understand Westar has been with the HAQAST program from the very beginning, from the HAQAST period. I remember Tom serving as the external reviewers for our Tiger Team projects. We greatly appreciate that. Now, it's time for our discussion. I see one question in the Q&A box from Jonathan Pads. Questions for Chris. Chris, can you say a bit more about building height impact? Assuming shade during the day and heat release at night, but how about urban ventilation? Tall buildings can disrupt airflow. Can you please comment?
Hi, folks. Hi, Jonathan. Great question. Yes, there's probably at least two ways to get at this. One is probably the most complex / realistic, but maybe not most, arguably whether it's most accurate, would be using a numerical model where you would feed that either reanalysis or something else into an urban canopy model to get at the multiple reflections and the change into the wind direction, sunlight, and things like that. For the maps that we made just from the satellites, just because there's sort of point in time measurements from Otis, one at about 1:30 a.m. Eastern for us, and then 1:30 in the morning. So it was sort of, I guess you could think of it as a sort of averaging over the building heights in that area. But to really get it sort of mechanistically, or how can you get at design challenges, yeah, you probably need to link that with something else. Great questions.
Thanks, Chris. I don't see other questions in the Q&A or chat box. I mean, panelists, feel free to ask questions. Now, since I don't have any outside questions, I'm going to run my questions and ask, Daniel, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, it's very nice talk, both Mary and Natalie, appreciate that. I have a question for Mary first. So Mary, you mentioned that several ways we can utilize satellite data to help your work. One of those is using satellite data to confirm that one monitor was actually influenced by some events. So is that a quantitative, you use that in a quantitative sense, or it's more like qualitative, just say, hey, this is a smoke flowing by, maybe this monitor was impacted?
Yeah, I think when you look at state's exceptional events demonstration, you'll see both quantitative and qualitative. They will use a variety of methods to make that demonstration, sort of a weight of evidence approach. It's very difficult in a monitor itself. You can't separate out what was from the smoke and what might be from the area, other sources in the area. So there's really, yeah, you have to have both.
So just follow up on that. For the exceptional events analysis, was that when we determined that one event was contributed by natural events, is that also a threshold, like 1 microgram per cubic meter for PM2.5 or 1 ppb for ozone, that we quantify that as a natural event? Or how was that determined? I know both you and Tom have been working on it for a long time. I just do not have the background information.
Yeah, there's not a hard and fast threshold for doing that, and I think that's what makes these demonstrations so difficult. I think in trying to give the regulatory agencies a lot of flexibility. EPA doesn't have hard and fast thresholds, which is good. But it also leads to these, hundreds of pages of demonstration for a single event. And as we've seen, these need to hold up in court. So yeah, but it's not always easy. Sometimes it's a little bit of proving the negative, that you're coming at it from a different side, to show that there would be no other explanation for this. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to give other panelists opportunities to speak. Let me ask Natalie a question. So I'm not sure how much interaction you or your organization have had with a team like HAQAST. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and just kind of tell us what your expectations are, or what challenges that you can foresee in terms of working with even with us that are kind of application oriented, but not really knee deep into policy making or public communication, things like
Sure.
that.
Yeah. I was invited to this through Daniel, actually, and his team, and he's doing some work with PM10 in Western states. And so when I learned about it, it sounded very intriguing because my background is in environmental science and public health. And I really am interested in that nexus and the fact that NASA is focused so much on incorporating health, which I think for a long time was kind of forgotten, that that was the root of our environmental laws, is based on health. And sometimes it seems like it's just forgotten about. So I think that being invited as somebody who could potentially use the information that that you all are working on through the academic community and scientific research is really, really helpful. I do think in my former position, I was at the University of Arizona, and one of the things that I often would be frustrated about is that there would be a lot of research happening, really great research, and it never quite made it to the people that could use it. It was just research, and then the actual using of the information was where things kind of got lost. And so I think it's great that I was invited to this, even though I'm not necessarily doing the kind of rigorous analytical work that you all are doing, but it's helpful, I think, probably to continue to try to reach out to people like myself and the local and state governments, and really make sure that what you're doing can be applied at the local level, and that the research that's being done is research that could be helpful and can ultimately be applied in the future to benefit public health. So I really appreciate being here, and I feel like I'm learning a lot, and hopefully I can continue to be involved in the future in whatever capacity is helpful.
And let me follow up on that, Natalie. If you are in need of just one technical solution from HAQAST, what would that be, and how do you plan to kind of engage us, or let us engage with you?
Mm-hmm. It's tough. I would say that probably wildfire is the most pressing issue for us with respect to satellite data, and just being able to assess and determine in advance what the effect of the wildfire smoke is going to have on our community, so that we can communicate that out to them in a timely manner, so that they can then make adjustments to their daily lives based on that. If we're telling them and it's already happening, it's a bit too late. And that's kind of what happens. Happens with ozone as well. Although our summers are so hot that convincing people to stay indoors is not too tough. But with wildfires, I think that there's, it's so, in fact, this last summer, we seemed to have a pretty significant wildfire issue, but we didn't have any wildfire locally. And then the year that we had the wildfire locally, the wind was blowing the other way, and we didn't have a huge issue with the wildfire coming into the valley, or the smoke coming into the valley. So just being able to tell people what we expect will happen as far as the smoke concentrations in our area, and be able to tell them where it's coming from also, I think it could be really, really helpful. And that's probably the most significant issue with respect to satellite data that we will have.
Okay, thanks, Natalie. And your comment actually leads my question to Daniel, who's modeling fire smoke, long range transport. Daniel, in your presentation, I somehow got the impression that after you've tested 3 different injection height schemes, the results don't vary that much, right? What does that mean for a air pollution forecaster or a like operational modeler?
Well, I think that's both good news and bad news. The bad news is if you use different plume rise schemes, you're gonna see big difference in near the source, like immediately after the release, and also at the edge of the plume, like how far it can transfer and which direction it goes. But on the bulk of the plume, right? So the most of the plume schemes can actually capture that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so there will be differences and also kind of convergence, right?
Yeah, so the main body is still the same, right? Yeah, I think we also got a few questions in the quick Q&A from Michael Giger. If you don't mind, I can just jump on because this is related to that.
Oh yeah, sure. I was going to kind of jump back and forth from the panelists, my questions and then the Q&A questions. Michael Geiger asked a question. Daniel, do you want to address that?
Yeah, so Michael, because you may not all see his question, he said we could use a CMAX model with the ozone difference with a smoke plume too. Yes, that's a great question, Mike. I know ozone problem is more widespread in the country, especially in the eastern US. But I'm a very technical guy, so I'm a little bit hesitant right now to release the ozone product for 2 reasons. One is the ozone chemistry is way more complicated, right, than the smoke and ash. So that's just transport and emissions. The ozone chemistry, because it's so complicated, so the model have a higher uncertainty right now. So we are still trying to understand that. The second part of it is the emission is for ozone precursors is highly uncertain, especially for LUX and VOCs. There are very few field measurements, including the recent field measurements. They don't have a lot of data on that. And then on the so that put a lot of uncertainty on both emissions and also the chemistry. But we are looking into that, and one of the projects in our team is trying to use satellite data to improve emissions for ozone precursors. So hopefully, Michael, in the coming 1 or 2 years, we might be able to get you something that is more usable.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Again, from the Q&A, I see Tom Moore post a question for Mary, or a suggestion for Mary. Could you comment on our members' needs with respect to the Clean Air Act, time horizons, and how that interacts with what we have learned from remote sensing? Mary?
Well, this is Tom Morris, of course, my colleague at Westar RAP. Tom, I need a little more detail about where you're going with that. I'm not quite sure what you're asking me.
Tom, if you heard Mary, I guess you just keep typing, right? In the Q&A to provide them
Can we
details.
unmute him or no?
Okay. So I hope he's typing. And I'm going to move on to Chris. I have a question about your ED visit analysis. Are your results affected by your definition of extreme events? Have you considered the impact of cloud cover on results? Because you said, and we all kind of aware that land surface temperature data is not available all the time everywhere. You got cloud cover and you lose 50% of the data.
Yeah, great question. So the composites, since it's probably over 1,000 images, it's probably relatively reasonable representation at the zip code level in particular. But that being said, I think you're right. There's still the known unknowns of what the cloud cover is. And I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think when I was a student, oftentimes, right, there'd be a cloud mask and we throw it out. But for something like extreme heat, I actually want the days where the cloud's there too. that provides valuable information for me at the ground because there's a physical process that's being reinforced there. Yeah, so I was just trying to think about that too. But yeah, I think that's fair to say there's some uncertainty there. We try to average over it over a day, multiple days and years, but definitely still some uncertainty there.
Great. So I see in the Q&A, Kevin Fuel asked a question about tempo. There's an upcoming mission from NASA that is tempo, which is geostationary for air quality management. Are there plans from the panelists to engage in the use or benefits of this satellite-driven product? Perhaps, near real-time monitoring of threshold exceedances. I think this question is not only for the science team members of HAQAST, but also for stakeholders like Mary and Natalie. If we do have an instrument like Tempo flying around, making measurements, making air quality measurements multiple times a day, what do you see as its kind of most important applications? Well, not most important, but like most accessible applications or low-hanging fruit, so to speak?
Yeah, we, Westar RAP, we've been a part of the Tempo early adopters workshops, and we hosted one of those a couple of years ago. We've been thinking about this data a lot and anticipating its availability. I think, some of the things, if we can use it to, figure out some of the local scale things that we miss with on the ground monitoring because of the distance between monitors, because of the cost of using monitors, I think that would be of great benefit. So I think there are probably going to be, once we start seeing that data, more applications than we've even discussed in our workshops. But I know that is something that has come up in our workshops.
And Natalie, any thoughts on that?
Well, I don't know if I know enough about it to really speak to it. If it's super localized kind of data, is that kind of what the advantage of it, trying to isolate areas that have the extreme heat issues, and in our work with them for environmental justice, that's something that's going to be coming up, and something that we're going to be working a lot more on in the future, and just kind of how climate change issues will affect certain communities within our region. So if we can utilize the data it collects that's more localized and granular, then that could definitely be helpful to us on those topics.
Yeah, I think Tempo's data products will likely have slightly better spatial resolutions than what we have right now, such as Tropomi. But more importantly, Tempo gives you multiple measurements per day. And Tropomi is a polar orbiting satellite. It gives you one measurement, a kind of snapshot per day. But Tempo is going to give you every 15-minute measurements. So you're able to actually track an event, track the evolution of the event. So it's going to be a lot more information available for us. And that, I mean, it's definitely an opportunity, but it presents some challenges for our stakeholders to handle that. Just think about the massive data volume we're dealing with right now, and then for Tempo, you just see that like a 10-fold increase in data streaming and then volume. Without some pre-processing on the NASA side, it would be pretty hard to digest. Right? It requires a serious kind of beefing up of your computing hardware infrastructure in order to just take advantage of it.
Right. So it would need to, for our uses, I would think it would need to be done by somebody else, that part consolidated into a format that is usable to us, because we just don't have the staffing or the capacity to be able to handle the large data sets like that. So it would need to be compressed and then given to us in some format that could then be, that we wouldn't need to deal with the large volume of data.
Right. I mean, not only that, and like Mary said, multi-year access, long-term, easy access to data are very important for our state agencies, local agencies to use satellite data, because very often you need to look back and pull a large chunk of data, right? If it's all sort of binary package, NetCDF format or HDF, those machine readable formats, that could be an issue. Right? Okay. Another question in the Q&A from this one's from Pawan for Daniel. In your satellite model analysis of fires, did you find cases where AOD values are not high enough to explain very high surface PM values?
Yeah, we did see that especially after long-range transport. For example, the 2002 fire into the eastern United States. Some days you probably remember living here, you saw smoky skies, but actually the EPA monitor was reading pretty low concentration. So that but then later, after a few days, actually the smoke mixed down. You can actually smell it. So there are days that you can see high AOD, but no surface concentration. And if I may, I also want to respond to a question that Michael Giger posed here. So he said the Briggs method looks reliable. Would you need to run all three? So the question is not about the scheme itself. It's also about the input you use to drive this polymerized schemes. So for example, Briggs are using heat flux as a major input, and that is not directly measurable, right? So if you use SOFAV, it's directly using satellite observation of fire radiative power to calculate the plume rise. So that will give you more reliable input. It's not only about the model, it's about the input that you can use.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. We're at I'm on the East Coast, we're at 5:56 right now. Thank you all for staying so late with us, at least for people on the East Coast. I think I like to wrap up the session with one more question for Mary. I've been with HAQAST for the entire course. I've been on this program for 10 years, and so have you. Over the years, do you see any improvements in ways that we interact with stakeholders? And if so, and we got 4 more years or 3 more years ahead of us, what would be your suggestions for additional improvements or different ways of, interaction?
Sure. Well, I have to say that we just held our fall business meeting in December, and we had several HAQAST members doing presentations on that were relevant to Western air quality issues. So that 10 years ago wasn't really going on. So I would say that there is connection between the projects, and I think as things are getting more, well, let's see, how can I say this? Well, as you all know, that the EPA is reconsidering standards. We're expecting a tighter ozone standard, a tighter PM standard into the future. And so, where states had, I would say easier solutions to meet standards before, now we're getting down to where states have to have great accuracy. They have to really understand their sources of air pollution that they can control and their sources that they can't control. And I think satellite data can help with that sort of, mostly qualitative analysis for the states. So I think what I think is that over the years, satellite data is becoming more relevant. States are seeking that solution more often, although they may not have yet the expertise to deal with the data. They're pulling it in for unique solutions in SIPs, in emergency response on wildfire smoke, on dust storms, and those kinds of things. So I think there's been great strides made, and that's why we keep attending Westar and RAP. That's why this is important to us, because our members are more and more understanding this and seeing that there can be helpful solutions.
Thanks, Mary. And as a HAQAST team member, we really appreciate your presence and support. And we hope that our work would actually contribute to your work and make your life a little bit easier. We have long ways to go, I understand that, but we're going in the right direction, as I can see. Now we're at the bottom of the hour. I want to thank all our panelists for their great presentation and the discussion. And I want to thank our participants for their questions. And I hope you have enjoyed our session. If you missed anything, like Alex said, the whole session is being recorded, and then later it's going to be posted on YouTube. So that concludes our session. Thank you very much. And I hope you have some time to, stay for the flash talks.